Sterling Maddox had witnessed his fair share of brutality out in the wood valleys. Men destroyed by loneliness, the woods devouring their better selves. But nothing in all his years could possibly have readied him for what lay behind Amos Thatcher's outhouse that foggy morning. What he discovered there didn't just unsettle him. It turned everything he believed he understood about the bounds of a father's anger on its head. The path to the Thatcher ranch was steep, bordered by tall pines exhaling specters of fog. Sterling's wagon groaned underneath him, his broken axe handle lying next to him on the seat. Amos Thatcher was rumored to sell fine hickory, and winter was approaching, so Sterling could not be out of a functioning blade.
No axiqueld no firewood. No firewood equaled no survival.
The Thatcher home stood hidden in an empty valley so quiet, even the wind dared not whisper. People had talked about Amos for years, how his wife had died, how sorrow had turned to gall, how he hardly spoke a single word to anyone anymore. Sterling hadn't given the gossip much thought. Things get blown out of proportion at night. But some truths don't have to yell. They yell loudest when they don't say a thing. When he arrived at the ranch, something was wrong.
No barking dogs, no clucking hens.
Only a sort of dead silence that lay over everything like a shroud. Sterling called. Nothing replied except the ring of his own voice. Then distant he heard it, a muffled, soft whimper. Not an animal but a human trying not to weep. The noise drew him around the house, by an empty corral, to the weathered wooden outhouse. Something inside his stomach urged him to retreat, but he didn't. His fingers rested on the latch. And then he heard it again, weak, pitiful, human. He opened the door and stepped back in revulsion. Within, curled in the corner and chained to a rusty ring anchored to the wall, was a girl. Her dress was in shreds, her face smeared with dirt, her hair matted like thorns. But it was her eyes which froze him in his tracks. Eyes gaunt with terror, sapped with misery, eyes which lifted to his with the wary hopelessness of one long beyond rescue. "Please, don't hurt me," she breathed. Sterling froze. This wasn't just hardship. This wasn't just neglect. This was something monstrous. The chain around her ankle had carved her skin raw. She hadn't been left here. She'd been kept here. For how long? And why? Before he could fully make sense of it, heavy boots crunched on the earth behind him. Well, came a gravel-rough voice. "Looks like someone found my little secret." Sterling turned to see Amos Thatcher a few strides back, rifle at the ready, expressionless face. No guilt, no fear, just a hot-eyed annoyance. The sort of thing a man achieves when someone's invaded private peccadillos. "You shouldn't have taken a shortcut round the back," Amos remarked in a flat tone. "Some things aren't meant for other folks to witness." Sterling ground his fists together. "That's your daughter." Amos moved closer, his boots thudding like threats. "Maggie ain't been the same since her mama died. Gets fits. Wild ones. This," he indicated the chains, "keeps her from hurting her, something like her." The words slapped harder than any blow. Sterling stared at the girl. Beneath the grime, beneath the bruises, there was intelligence. There was a person, a soul. "You're going to unlock those chains," Sterling said, quiet and firm. Amos laughed, a harsh rattle. "The devil I am. You're going to spin around, get back in your wagon, and forget you ever saw anything. Unless you'd like to keep her as company." The rifle moved ever so slightly, not aimed, but at the ready. Sterling did not stir. "I came to purchase hickory, but it looks like we have a different type of business." "Thinkin' wrong," Amos snarled. "Way I figure you're a trespasser. Danger to my property. I'll have the right to defend myself. That's what they'll hear in town." Sterling's heart racing. Amos wasn't merely concealing cruelty. He was guarding a falsehood. Most likely informed people Maggie had fled. Or died. Or perhaps that she never actually existed. "People know I came here," Sterling told him. "They'll see my version. Always do." The standoff was stretched as thin as wire. Maggie's eyes were fixed on Sterling now. There was a desperate plea behind them. A question she did not dare put into words. Would he go like the others? Sterling breathed. "How many times you practiced that speech, Amos? How many others got to her before me? Something flashed in Amos' eyes. Something that didn't belong to a sure man. Then, a whisper from the rear severed all else. There were others, Maggie said. Her voice was husky, but distinct. But they never left the ranch. The words strike as gunfire. Amos hardened. Shut your mouth. The preacher, the cattle buyer. They found me too. Papa told them the same lies he's telling you. Sterling's gut curled. The cycle unfolded like a trap closing. Guests arrived, discovered her, and disappeared. Amos didn't just lock away his daughter. He erased the people who attempted to rescue her. How many? Sterling asked, shaking. Enough, Amos hissed. Enough to ensure that this issue remains buried. The rifle came up, this time with lethal intent. But Sterling had spent a lifetime with axes and crashing wood. He sprinted, ducking behind the trough as the rifle boomed. The bullet exploded mere inches from his head. 10 seconds. That's all he had before the next shot. You made this difficult, lumberjack, Amos shouted. Could have been painless. Now it's gonna bleed. Sterling took a peek. Amos was lying behind the house, rifle steady on target. But he couldn't catch sight of Maggie from there, and Sterling caught a glimpse of something that gave him hope in his belly. The chain on her ankle hung loose. All those years of Maggie yanking on the chain had weakened the hook in the wall. Still held but by a thread. One last desperate pull might just snap it. Maggie, he breathed softly, his voice barely over a whisper, so not to reach Amos's ears. The chain? Can you break it? She leaned forward and touched the ring. The metal rod inside the splintered wood moved, and for the first time in perhaps months, hope danced in her pupils. But Amos was done reloading. Time's over, stranger, he snapped. Pray for more. Sterling didn't need to think. Rather than ducking for shelter, he charged directly at the outhouse, toward Maggie, toward the sole future either of them had. The rifle was. He slammed into the outhouse wall and dropped to his knees, grabbing the chain. When I yank this loose, he gasped, you run. Straight to my wagon. Don't balk. Don't look back. Just go. He pulled both hands around the chain and pulled with all his might. The wood creaked, the bolt screamed, and then it parted. The ring tore loose in a spurt of rust and splinters. Maggie was free, but Amos was already coming around the corner. Rifle up. Murder in his eyes. Maggie staggered, legs shaking with too many months of bondage. Sterling grasped her, supported her, then pushed her down the trail. Run, he yelled. Amos aimed the rifle. He seized the nearest thing within arm's reach, a rusted shovel propped against the outhouse, and spun just as the rifle cracked again. The bullet slammed into his shoulder, spinning him, dropping him to one knee. Pain had burst through him, but rage burned hotter. This man, this monster, had locked his own daughter in here like some kind of animal. And Sterling was not going to let it continue. Maggie stopped when she heard him cry out. No! She screamed, starting toward him. Keep going! He barked, staggering to his feet, blood soaking his shirt. His arm hung useless, but his legs still moved, and he had one good hand gripping the shovel. Amos advanced, confident, grinning like a wolf who'd cornered his prey. You should have stayed out of this, lumberjack, he sneered. Now you're gonna end up like the rest. The rest? Sterling snarled, spitting blood, advancing one step. How many men have you murdered to keep your secret? Amos' laugh was bitter and cutting as sharp shards of glass. Look at her, he said, venom dripping from his voice. You think anyone would desire something that ugly? I did the world a service keeping her imprisoned. Nobody needs to see that face. Sterling's vision wavered with rage. The shovel's weight disappeared in his hand. It was like fire, like justice. The only thing that is ugly here, he snarled, is what's in you. He swung. The shovel crashed into Amos' head with a nauseating crack, and the old man collapsed like wet tissue. The rifle slid from his fingers and skidded across the earth. Blood seeped from the wound, but Amos still lived. Barely. Sterling let go of the shovel and staggered toward Maggie, who stood mute by the wagon. Her eyes were wide, not with fear of the violence but something else, something deeper. "You returned," she whispered. "You returned for me?" "Of course I did," Sterling replied, voice raw. "No one deserves what he did to you. No one." Maggie's eyes welled up with tears, the first tears she'd allowed herself in months. "But look at me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm everything he told you I was. Ugly. Worthless. Why would you put your life in danger for someone like me?" Sterling lifted his good hand and smoothed his fingers against the dirt on her cheek. Through the grime and the terror, he saw what her father never did, what he wouldn't. Strength. Kindness. A soul that had survived hell and still stood intact. "Want to know what I see?" he whispered. "I see someone who lived through the unimaginable, and yet still had the courage to make a voice heard. I see someone who cautioned me when everyone else was silent. I see someone lovely." Maggie gazed at him as if she'd never heard the term before. "You're hurt because of me." "I'm hurt because of him," Sterling replied. "Not you. Never you." Behind him, Amos moaned, his fingers twitching in the dirt. "There wasn't much time." "We need to get into town," Sterling said. "The truth has to come out. Nobody will believe me," Maggie told him, her head shaking. "He would always say they'd call me insane. And when they get a glimpse of my face, they'll see someone worth fighting for." Sterling assisted her into the wagon. Every action was torture, but he clung to it and grasped the reins. Amos opened his eyes behind them just in time to watch his daughter disappear down the trail. His angry voice boomed through the valley. But too late. For the first time in her life, Maggie was free. Sterling knew better than to rejoice. The real battle had just begun. He urged the horses, driving them hard down the trail as blood wet his side and blurred his vision. The wagon creaked and bounced over every rut, but he didn't slacken. They had to get to Cedar Falls before Amos did. Next to him, Maggie sat stiff, fists clenched, eyes darting back to the trail. "He's on his way," she whispered. "He always told, if I ever ran, he'd track me down and bring me back." Sterling set his teeth. "Let him. You won't be facing him by yourself this time." And yet, even as he spoke, the danger hung like storm clouds. Amos was familiar with these hills. He had new horses, firearms. No more to lose now the truth had clawed its way into sunlight. Cedar Falls was an hour north, if they ever reached there. Then they heard it. Hoofbeats. Several. Coming closer. Amos hadn't traveled alone. Maggie's voice broke. "He said they warned them I am dangerous, that I attacked him, that you kidnapped me." Sterling's heart sank. Of course Amos had rallied a posse. Of course he'd twisted the story. A respected rancher with a battered face versus a stranger and a broken girl no one had seen in years. A voice rang out behind them. "Pull up that wagon. You're under arrest for assault and abduction." Sheriff Wade Langston. Sterling recognized him. Good man, maybe, but not good enough to see through Amos' lies, not yet. "What do we do?" Maggie asked. Sterling took the only option available. He turned off the trail, directing the wagon into a narrow canyon pass he'd taken years before while logging. It was dangerous, too skinny for most, but it was their best bet. "Hold on," he said. "This is going to be rough." The wagon crashed against the rocky incline. Behind them, the posse reined in, hesitating. Voices of argument rose up, some calling to pursue, others cautioning against the narrow pass. But Amos' voice cut above them all, hateful and authoritative. "My daughter's life is at stake. We pursue them now or lose them forever." The clatter of horses coming into the canyon informed Sterling everything he needed to know. Amos was arriving, and he didn't mind taking however many lives were at risk to bring his daughter back into the darkness. The canyon walls towered up and tight around them, devouring the waning light. The wagon bucked with each rock and rut, jolting Sterling's battered shoulder and causing them to tip. Behind them, the posse's horses struggled over the treacherous path. Sterling heard shouting, curses, the panic of a rider thrown. But Amos' voice never faltered. Rage drove him forward like a madman. "No one's gone near it in years. Improved chances than staying out here. A shot cracked behind them, the bullet sparking off the canyon wall. The posse was getting close, and their patience was running out. The mine loomed ahead, a black mouth hidden beneath years of fallen timber and silence. Sterling steered the wagon as far as he could before the wheels jammed. "We go on foot." He nearly collapsed climbing down, but Maggie caught him. "You're bleeding too much. I'll bleed later. We move now." They rushed into the mine, Sterling hanging onto a lantern he lit with shaking hands. The faint light illuminated a narrow passageway lined with rotting beams. Wet earth and age filled the air. Water dripped far away, and the silence closed in against their ears like a threat. "This way," Maggie whispered. "The crawl space is halfway in. We'll have to squeeze through." Behind them, voices called out, Sheriff Langston, others. "Tracks go into the mine." "It's not safe," one cautioned. "I don't care about safe," Amos bellowed. "My daughter's in there with a madman." They came to what appeared to be a solid wall. But when Sterling raised the lantern, a slit showed. A slit big enough to crawl through. "That's it," Maggie said. "If it hasn't fallen in." Boots rang on stone behind them. The posse had ventured into the mine. Sterling blew out the lantern. "Go," he whispered. "I'm right behind you." Maggie slipped through the crack in the rock. Sterling followed, pain screaming in his shoulder. But just as he cleared the gap, a sound like thunder echoed behind them. The mine groaned, beams splintering, sealing the narrow passage behind them, trapping Amos and his men in the dark. Sterling and Maggie gasped and stumbled forward. Softly, a breeze caressed their faces. Then light. They came out on a rocky hillside, looking down over the open valley. The sun kissed the peaks, coloring the sky in golden warmth. Behind them, they heard shouts, thick, trapped voices. The mine hadn't completely collapsed, but the passageway through was entombed. "It's over," Maggie whispered. "He can't reach me anymore." Sterling leaned on a rock, half delirious. Blood loss softened the borders of his vision, yet he looked at her, really looked at her, by daylight for the first time. Her face was marred, worn, toughened by pain. Her features weren't dainty. Yet what he gazed upon there wasn't ugliness, it was survival. It was dignity. It was resilience. "You're mistaken," he told her softly. "About what you just said. About being ugly." Maggie glared away, embarrassed. "You don't have to say that. I'm not lying. You want to know what ugly is? Ugly is a man who chains his own daughter and calls it love. Ugly is hate passed down as inheritance. But you're beautiful, Maggie. Right here." He placed his hand on his heart. "Where it matters." Tears streamed silently down her face. But this time they weren't tears of fear. "What next?" she asked. "They believe I'm dead, or that I've gone. If you'll come with me," she breathed. "I already said that. I'd fight for you. I'd stand with you. That hasn't changed." Down the slope, dust was kicked up. Riders were coming from Cedar Falls. News had spread. Help was on the way this time. Later, Sheriff Langston would step out of the mine with a face of stone. All Maggie had said was true. The outhouse, the chains, the blood. Amos Thatcher would see justice. And the remains of the missing men would at last be discovered. At the doctor's office, Maggie stood alongside Sterling while both their injuries were attended to. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't nothing. She was somebody who had survived, and somebody who had been chosen. Outside, the sun fell below the horizon, setting Cedar Falls on fire with color and possibility. Tomorrow would be difficult, but it would be theirs. And Maggie Thatcher, daughter, survivor, fighter, was finally free. At other times, that freedom is the loveliest thing of all.